Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 7th Annual Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I'm Jamie Machik with the Wisconsin Valley Library Service, and I am moderating the Library Leadership track today. We have this session and two more sessions today in this track. And assisting me today is Jean Anderson with the South Central Library System, and we're so glad to have you here. Our presenter for this session is Brian Mortimer, and he is with the Kent District Library in Michigan. And he's going to be talking about library hiring. Some of you might have seen Brian speak at the Waffle Conference last May. And if you didn't, well, you're in for a great presentation. So Brian, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here, and just to kind of check in with everybody, let you know where I'm at in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm about a half hour just east of Lake Michigan. So in terms of where that is in relation to you, it gives you maybe a little sense of where I'm calling from. My pleasure to be here today. My pleasure to talk to you about topics around hiring. And I've got my overview of the day kind of listed there. And we're going to talk about a number of different things: setting the stage for recruitment and staffing, developing job descriptions. There's a handout actually that you have on a job description, so you'll be able to take a look at that and follow along when I do hit that slide and talk about it. We're going to talk about essential functions of the job, developing a posting and setting deadlines. There's some nuances to all this stuff that everybody doesn't necessarily know, or they don't really teach in library school. They don't even teach in HR school this stuff. Sometimes they just pick it up after maybe, 20 some years of doing it. So we're going to talk about pre-interviews, what those are all about, how you confirm someone's interests and what I refer to as their wage compatibility and their ability to work a schedule. Talk about types of interview questions that you might include in your interviews, and the value of developing an interview evaluation tool. I'm going to talk about something we refer to as common rater errors, so that when your committee or individuals who are interviewing someone actually speaks to their thoughts and ideas about that candidate's qualities, you can spot some of the common rater errors and maybe in a polite way call them out. And not calling the individual out, I didn't mean it like that, but to identify those rater errors so that we don't discredit or disregard a candidate. And then there's this notion of managing the interview process itself, and of course making job offers and establishing start dates. So that's a lot for us to cover. In addition to the handout on the job description, I also provided a handout on something that we call our Circulation Assistant Substitute Staffing Pool. And that is a system that we developed about 10, 11 years ago here in Michigan. And it's been adopted by many other libraries throughout Michigan as sort of a staffing best practice. And that document's available to you. And if we have time, I'll cover some of the things in that document as well. But as always, if you have questions about any of those handouts and you want to get a hold of me afterwards, I'm happy to take your email questions. And for that matter, if anyone happens to be heading out to ALA Midwinter in Seattle, that's where I'll be over the next week. So look me up and do say hello, okay? So let's get started. So last night, let's assume your board just approved the hiring of a full-time children's librarian. Now what happens? Well, you know the drill. As soon as this happens, it's going to create quite a buzz. There's a lot of people out there who are going to be thinking about, oh my gosh, that's my job, this one's for me. I put in my time. I got my MLS here a year or so ago, and I'm tired of my part-time job, and maybe this is my moment. And then you're going to have all the lobbying that goes on behind the scenes. Other staff, other managers will be talking to you as the hiring manager about, oh, geez, Sarah would be perfect for this, or it's Rick's time. He's been here so long and so dedicated, and it's time for them to step up and do this job. So as the hiring supervisor, you have this enormous pressure, right? It just comes out of nowhere. I mean, you just finally got a position approved, and it's in the budget, and you're excited to be able to expand your services to your community and and do some new and wondrous things that you never had the time for in the past, and now you've got all this pressure. And so I've got my first suggestion here is do not speak of the position in terms of it being Sarah's or Rick's or April's position. Always speak of it as the position. And when people start talking about, you know, this could be, you know, Sarah's big opportunity or April's big opportunity, speak in terms of very non-committed terms. Speak in terms of, well, all candidates will be reviewed, you know, and we look forward to their application. I would not have a whole lot of sidebar conversations with people. You're going to have folks that are going to want to, you know, take you out to coffee or, oh, and all the weird stuff starts happening too. You know, people who are just sort of like moderately engaged in their job in the past, those people are suddenly showing up a half hour early to work each day, and they're bringing you new ideas, and it's kind of like they're auditioning for the job, you know. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, people do that. We're human, and that's part of human nature. But understand that these are the dynamics that you, as the hiring supervisor, are faced with. So my next piece of advice is don't skip any of the important steps of planning and preparing for this position before you post it. This is your timeline. All things according to their proper time and according to their proper order, I say. So keep that in mind. So let's talk about, you've got this new position, and it's time to develop a job description if you don't have the job description already. But there's a few things that you should have, and if you've got access to the handout right now, I've got a job description that Kent District Library uses. And in preparation for this talk today, I found something interesting in here, and I'll point it out in a little bit. But this is a outreach specialist position, and there's different components to job descriptions. Sometimes job descriptions are these big, long, rambling documents that, you know, have paragraph after paragraph about what a person does. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but the way we have done them, we've done them consistently so that right across the top, it acknowledges the position title, then it acknowledges the pay range. Now, you may or may not have designated pay ranges. If you have a union, you very likely have designated pay ranges. If you don't have a union, you may or may not have gone so far as to designate your pay ranges. I suggest you do. There's a number of reasons for that under, you know, the points of determining compensation for positions and ensuring equity and equal pay for equal work. But for purposes of this, we have the pay range listed there. We've also listed that it's a non-exempt position, meaning it's not exempt from the rules of the Department of Labor's overtime provisions. So it's an hourly position. It's not a salaried position. Then we have recognition that it reports to the manager of community engagement. And then we acknowledge whether or not they supervise anyone. And in this case, they don't. The next thing that you're going to see there is a job summary. And I like to keep these short and sweet. So you see here a very short job summary that basically gives the gist of what this position does. And so every job summary across all your job descriptions should be different from one another. If they're not different from one another, if they seem very, very similar, then that's your first indication that maybe you have two separate job descriptions that could be combined into one. And I'm here to tell you that libraries are notorious for creating multiple job descriptions for very, very similar work. This is something I've seen not only at Kent District Library when I came here about 15 years ago, but I've seen it across all kinds of other libraries. I do library consulting as well. And so I've seen it over and over again. So that's your first acid test. Is your job summary different than the job summaries on all the other job descriptions? From there, we go into duties and responsibilities. They're all listed here. You can read these. But I want to talk about something around the essential functions of the job. Look at that first bullet. Identifies and facilitates the deployment of outreach efforts by coordinating staff, activities, and materials through different channels. And then suggestions are listed: mobile, online, offsite, and others. Just imagine if you had somebody who said, you know, I'm good with all this, but I've got a lot of anxiety about going out into the community and meeting strangers. That's not really my thing. Wouldn't that be interesting? And wouldn't that be kind of a deal breaker? I mean, if you think about it, an outreach specialist needs to be comfortable interacting with others. This is not somebody who might gravitate towards, say, exclusively doing original cataloging, you know, working in the back room and technical services. This is somebody that needs to be outgoing, needs to be comfortable interacting with a variety of folks out there in the community. So if somebody indicated to you that they can do the job, they're comfortable with the job, except they would like some accommodations around not going off-site, to me, you know, that would kind of be a deal breaker. So I just wanted to point that out. Moving along, you can go to job requirements. And this is another area that very often people will create what I refer to as excessive job requirements. So when we think of a job and we think in the ideal world of, could be somebody with, you know, a master's of library science, 10 to 15 years experience, all that kind of stuff. But you know, at the end of the day, you have to be able to justify the words that you put down here, because if they exclude somebody or if they have an adverse impact on a group of individuals, then you're going to have a hard time defending why that job description requires that. In
Brian?
this case, yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Attendee members, the slides are not moving. Brian is referring to the handout, the job description that is in your handout section on the control panel. And if you aren't seeing that, then type something in the question box and we'll make sure you find it. Thanks, Brian.
Yes. Yeah, so the point being is it's very tempting to have really large requirements or really lofty requirements for your job descriptions. Resist that temptation, because when you do, you start to eliminate potential candidates who can do that job. So in this case, we require a bachelor's degree, and then we kind of open it up. Instead of saying a particular field, we give a variety of options: education, business, or relevant field of study. Because there are so many unique and different degrees out there, we just don't know what all of them are. And somebody might come in with, you know, who knows, I'm going to make this up right now, but, you know, I have a bachelor's degree in community outreach. Oh, wow, tell us about that degree. You know, that's a degree I've never heard of before. I want to learn more about that, but gosh, it sounds like it might have somebody ideally suited for this job. But we didn't know that that degree existed, or that field of study was even out there, so we didn't list it. Then you're going to see other things. Look under item 4. And if you don't have this, I'll read it to you. The job requirement under item 4 says bilingual, English/Spanish, preferred. Now, preferred means it's not required. But it does mean, all things being equal, we're going to strongly prefer that individual, because that individual is going to be able to do outreach to the Spanish-speaking community. And that's important to us. If we go up to job requirement number 3, ability to travel between work locations and related places of business as needed, you'll note this does not say reliable transportation or reliable automobile. Years ago, job descriptions often said that, and you might just kind of review your own job description, see if they say that, because in this day and age, my gosh, people can find a lot of different ways to get to work. They don't necessarily have to have a reliable vehicle. They can Uber in, for example. So that's the job requirement section. If we go through to the working conditions, that's the next section. We like to list out what kinds of things a person might expect in this kind of job or in this kind of position. And earlier, when I started talking about this, I shared that I discovered something in preparation for this meeting. And my team and I are going to talk about it later because I think we're missing something here under working conditions. I'm just not seeing a statement about working outdoors. I'm seeing the first statement says, generally will work within a normal office environment with minimal discomfort due to extreme temperatures, dust, and noise. And I no sooner tell you that, and I just watched a group of people take off with our bookmobile about a half hour ago, and I know that thing is not parked indoors right now. I know it's parked outside. I know it's cold. I know, the conditions are a little adverse. I think we need to update our job description. So that brings me to my next point. Job descriptions need to be updated on a regular basis. If you have the document handout, you'll see at the very bottom on the right-hand side, I've got the job title and a date on there. And that date represents the last time this job description was updated. It's important to keep your job descriptions updated. If they're not, then what generally happens is they get way out of date and then no one is following them. They're of no value to you. And when you try to use them as some sort of recruiting tool or evaluation tool, it's just not of value. In fact, it becomes a source of mockery. You've probably all heard the phrase, my job description hasn't been updated in 10 years. And my job description has things referenced on it that are completely irrelevant now. Whether it's software or resources that they once used that are not commonplace in the libraries, that would be a good example. Near the bottom of the job description as well, I want to read this to you. For those of you who don't have the handout, I'm going to just read this to you. But we have a couple of statements on here that I think are pretty significant. We developed these in collaboration with the Disability Advocates of West Michigan. And what we did with Disability Advocates of West Michigan, by way of background, is they came in and they reviewed all of our work locations so that we had a better idea as how accessible our facilities were for persons with disabilities, as well as our employees who might have disabilities. And it was a very helpful exercise to go through. We learned a lot of things about furniture placement and physical weight of opening a door and closing, different drawers or cupboards and whatnot. It was very helpful for us to go through that. They also gave us some feedback, though, because we're interested in accommodating people and encouraging persons that might think that they're not eligible to work at the library. And so they came up with this statement. I'm going to read it to you now. The library employment environment typically requires extensive computer, keyboard, and mouse activity, in-person, electronic, and telephone communication skills. Meeting attendance at various branch and service center locations is expected. Self-identified mode of transportation is required. The preparation, loading, and carrying or moving of materials is commonly required for all KDL positions. Reasonable accommodations are available for individuals with disabilities. Okay, that's the statement that we came up with working with that third party. Then we have what is commonly referred to as the other duties as assigned statement. And ours reads like this. This job description is intended to describe the general nature and level of work being performed by a person assigned to this job. They are not to be construed as an exhaustive list of all job duties that may be performed by a person so classified. So that's our job description. I'm going to pause for just a second and allow me to take a drink of water, and if people have questions and they want to send them to the moderator, then I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about the job description before we move on.
Yes, a few questions did come in, Brian. The first one is, we recently did a wage study, and the company who did the comparison indicated that the level of education required had a large impact on the wage. Any thoughts on this?
Yes. So for doing a wage study. And here's the thing about wage studies and compensation and development, is I always say that wages and determining wages are both art and science. So part art, part science. And whoever did that, you're doing the science part of it. So you're taking this and you're comparing your wages internally as well as your wages, I'm assuming, to the general market based on the nature of your positions. Yes, education, generally speaking, has a large impact on how you classify your respective positions. So years ago, we're talking like 30, 40 years ago, there was a group out of Chicago called the Hayes Group, and I think they're still around, Hayes Consulting, and they developed a point factor analysis, and they gave large points to higher education. So if something required a PhD, it generally paid more than something that required a graduate degree. And something that required a graduate degree and so on and so forth paid more than those with less. And they also gave points to other things. And this is where it's important for you to differentiate yourself. They gave points to years of experience. They gave points to things like decision-making or independent decision-making. They gave points to considerations such as what is the potential problem or impact if a person who is doing this job makes errors. And so you have things like independence of decision-making, potential for error or potential for incurring additional costs, potential to set direction and make independent judgments about the future of the organization. Those kinds of things all went into the Hayes point factor analysis system. Education is one of them, and education is a big one. What are my thoughts on that in general? I think there was a time when it counted for more than it does now. My experience now, particularly in the last 10 years, is a lot of people are able to get a lot of different experiences and access a lot of different knowledge in ways that are different than we had in the past. And that's probably a different webinar. But I'll just say that I think the future is going to have folks like us as library leaders really kind of flummoxed over, how exactly do we credit people who have education versus those who don't have education. We all know, the average debt out there for recent college graduates is over $40,000. So it's becoming very unpopular to go out and pursue a four-year degree, let alone a master's degree. So these are all considerations that you have to make. My bottom line on this stuff is, does it feel right? I have this position that there's this thing called compensation utopia. And it goes like this, and bear with me, it's going to sound a little funny at first. But imagine if I had the name and position title of everybody in your organization, and I had the wage that they earned. And I had all of those on one big report, and I posted them on the break room wall. And I invited everybody to come in and take a look at it. And then everybody came in and took a look at it, and those who were paid less than the person above them and more than the person below them all read that report and said, yep, looks right to me. No concerns, no problem. I agree with this report. That is compensation utopia. I have never seen compensation utopia take place, nor do I think it ever will. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people feel that they add more value than the person they're working alongside. So it's a challenge, right? It's both art and science. Very often, you'll have people who are slightly classified differently, but essentially they're able to make independent decisions. They're able to carry out their work with minimal supervision. In those cases, maybe they should be in the same pay grade. Great. So again, it's a large topic, but I hope that helps.
I'm going to ask one more question that came in because it's timely. Brian, do you recommend having the percentage of time spent on duties in the job description?
Well, I don't recommend it, but I think it's nice to have an idea internally about that. The problem with listing it, and we used to have that, we used to have like different jobs would list that, well, they've got 40% of their time is off desk and 60% is on desk. And the problem with that is what happens if you get into a situation where that 60% of on-desk time becomes 70%? Are you setting yourself up for complaints? Are you setting yourself up for, accusations of inconsistency? I think it's important to recognize that most jobs have some element of flexibility to them. And while those are guidelines, they're guidelines. There's no, I mean, when any of you walk into your library branch this morning, you don't know what you're going to be faced with that day. Any given day, you could have, you know, a group of school kids stop in because they've, you know, they had a snow day that day, and so suddenly you're twice as busy. You know, it's all hands on deck. People are going to have to be flexible. And I think it's important for your job descriptions to convey that.
Great. Those are all the questions right now, so please continue.
Okay, very good. So proceeding along, your next step here is developing a posting and setting a deadline. You know, a posting needs to kind of convey what the job is all about. And years ago, it was really important for postings to be short and brief because postings were so expensive to place in the newspaper, if anybody remembers that. And I remember getting charged based on how many lines, and we never wanted to have more than 6 lines. Well, you know, times have changed, and there's this thing called Indeed, and there's all, you know, most of you probably have a job site on your website so that if somebody's interested in working for the library, they know to click on jobs at the library and they can read all about, you know, the postings that you have. So you can have all kinds of information on there. I say resist the temptation to put too much on there. I think you want to have a realistic overview of the job, and you can feel free to link additional documents if necessary. Those kinds of documents typically would be like a summary of benefits associated with the job. That would be an ideal document to link. You can link, of course, the job description, but usually a paragraph that states, you know, this is the nature of the job, and we're looking for somebody with these types of skills, and we hope that you'll consider applying. You know, that's usually enough. And look to your that summary on your job description to create that or craft that statement. If you're recruiting for a position across state, you know, maybe you're recruiting for something like a managerial position that pays a little more, that you feel might have a larger, what I refer to as recruitable range. So a larger recruitable range. You might want to speak a little bit about the community and about the library and give them a little bit of background about that. That's very helpful, so that when your posting is posted on, I'm sure Wisconsin has some kind of statewide system for posting job opportunities, that you would then be able to see as a candidate, oh, you know, I get to learn about this community, and that's the approximate size, and it's, you know, it's located in this general area, and, you know, what are some of the amenities that I might enjoy. So I think that's helpful for people to have. It's important for you to be clear about a deadline. You have to set a deadline for your applications, and this can be done one of 2 ways. One way can be open until filled, and the other can be Friday at 5 o'clock, you know, with a specific date. Now, generally speaking, there's a hard deadline, like Friday the 14th at 5 o'clock. That would be an example of a hard deadline. Now, the advantage to that is that if somebody applies for the job or attempts to apply for the job after your deadline, then you clearly have a record of when they made that application, and you would not consider that individual because they didn't meet the deadline. So there's an advantage and disadvantage to the hard deadline. The advantage is you don't have people staggering in later and later and having to consider people and not knowing when you're going to conduct interviews because you don't know when your last applications are going to come in. Now, back in the day, we used to have to wait a couple of extra days after the deadline till the mail delivered, right? And I've actually heard of a couple of libraries that are still dealing with paper applications and still receiving mail. So if you're one of those, keep that in mind. But probably 98% out there now are dealing with online applications. So once that deadline happens, the application is automatically closed so that nobody can apply for it. Having a rolling deadline where it says the position is open until filled can be a good thing and a bad thing. Generally, it could be a good thing in that it will prompt people to apply early in the process, not delay. The problem is if the posting has been up for a few weeks now and somebody's seen it for the first time, they might get very discouraged thinking, well, the posting's been up for a few weeks and I'm sure I'm going to, I already missed out on this. They probably have a number of applications. So they just won't apply. You got to consider too, an awful lot of people out there who end up taking new jobs or new promotions did not even know that they were in the market for a new job or a new promotion. It happens through happenstance or through word of mouth. So if you can spread the word on social media tools like LinkedIn, even Facebook, you got a Facebook account for your library, you're looking for somebody, throw it out there. And I know what half of you are thinking right now. It's like, oh my gosh, what if this one patron applies for the job? They've always said they wanted to work here, but they're a nice patron, but we don't think they'd make a good employee. Well, you don't have to hire them, but it's important to put it out there because you might find the right candidate. And social media is a very valuable tool. Keep in mind also that if your system does not accommodate mobile applications like completed on a cell phone, if that's the case, approximately 80% of all job applications in this day and age are now completed on a cell phone. So keep that in mind. You might need to update your system. Then I talk about resisting the temptation to engage in an informal interview. Very often people will seek you out, you'll get phone calls. Hey, I heard that you had that new outreach specialist position approved. Boy, I've got the perfect person. She works for us. She just hasn't had an opportunity to promote up here. She needs full time. It'd be great if she could stay in Wisconsin. I hear she's looking at a job over at Kent District Library in Michigan, but we don't want her to go there. We want her to stay here in Wisconsin. So maybe you could be that, that person who saves her and keeps her right here in Wisconsin. So practice saying we look forward to reviewing your credentials after the posting deadline and we'll be in touch. And if somebody doesn't take the hint, say it again. Otherwise, you're going to have the opportunity or the occasion, I should say, where people start, getting information out of you. And they're going to have an unfair advantage, over the other candidates because they were persistent or because they reached out to you or they networked with you. There's nothing wrong with networking. I don't want to give you the impression there's anything wrong with networking. But it's important for you to maintain the integrity of your process. And that's the key here. Any questions up to this point?
I'm not, one actually just came in. How do you handle awkwardness of not hiring a faithful regular volunteer once a position opens that you don't feel they are right for, but you do want to keep them around?
Oh, that's a tricky one. So those situations happen all the time. And you do have, volunteers that, they're so dedicated and so loyal and we really appreciate them. For starters, we should never not offer a job to a volunteer because we're worried that if we do, then we're going to lose out on their 20 hours a week of volunteer service. That would be unethical. If you have a legitimate reason for not hiring a volunteer, it's probably along the lines of there were other candidates that were more qualified. It's important for people to understand that you're not hiring based on whether somebody put in their time as a volunteer or was completely dedicated to you over the last 10 years. The volunteer situation is just that. They enter it under their own free will, and there's no expectation of quid pro quo. There's no expectation of, I've been a volunteer for so long and I want to work here, and even though half the staff, feels kind of awkward around me because I say offensive things from time to time and whatnot, whatever it might be, I should be getting that job. No, that's not how it works. In fact, another way to think about it is volunteers in some respects are auditioning for jobs the whole time they're volunteers. And so there's both advantages and disadvantages to being an internal candidate. The advantage is of course, if you've been doing a great job, we're going to want to hire you. We're going to want to put you to work. If you haven't been doing a great job, or if you have, nuances to you that are, just not tolerated, then we're not going to hire you. But here's the bigger issue. If you have a volunteer who's trying to work for you and wants to work for you, and they have something that's holding them back, do them a favor and do yourself justice. Sit down with them and explain to them what that is. Let them know that these are the behaviors or these are the qualities that we're looking for, and from what we've seen, out of you, we see, we very much appreciate your volunteer work, but we just haven't seen those qualities in you, and we're not confident that we would see them going forward.
Great. That was an excellent question, and that's all we have for now if you want to keep going. And just want to let you know, Brian, we have just over 20 minutes left in the presentation.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the pre-interview. This is the occasion where you're going to reach out by phone or text. Yes, I did say text. There's a lot of people that really respond better to text these days. And you're going to ask them a few questions about their interest in the position. So you haven't scheduled them for an interview yet. And you're not calling them under the pretenses of scheduling them for an interview. You're calling them, and that call kind of goes like this. Hi, my name is Brian Mortimer, and I'm with the Human Resources Department at Kent District Library. Use your own name, of course. And you're going to say, I wanted to reach out to you because I saw that you applied for our position. Do you have a moment to talk right now? And more often than not, they're going to drop everything they're doing and they're going to say yes. Unless, of course, they gave you their work number and you call them at work, which I've actually had happen a number of times, in which case, make a note of it. It's bad judgment. You call their number, the number they put on their application or their resume, and it takes them right to their information desk. How weird is that, right? So if you have the sense that you've reached them at work, maybe because when you dialed the number, the automated phone system acknowledged the library you're calling, then you might say to them, I'm wondering if we can set up a time to talk when you have the ability to talk confidentially. And they'll usually say yes, and they'll give you a different number or whatever to call. But let's suppose you reach them on their own cell phone at a time when they can talk. And you're going to say, hey, I just saw that you applied for this position. I was looking over your resume, and I thought I would just get to know you a little bit further. We're in the very early stages of this right now, and so we're doing our very early stages of screening. What can you tell me about yourself? And that's when you go quiet and you just listen. And you let them talk for a minute or two, and they're going to tell you a little bit about their background. They're going to tell you about what they're doing now, why your position appeals to them, that kind of stuff. If for some reason they're having a hard time, they're not prepared for that phone call for some reason, and everybody should. Let's face it, if you're applying for a job, you got to be ready that once a phone call comes in, you got to be ready to, go through your list of achievements, and maybe at a high level at least. And so let's suppose that they go through some of that. And then you're going to reiterate, we're in the screening process right now. And this is all very true, by the way. You're in the screening process, and you're about to ask them a question that is going to be a screening tool for you. You're going to say something like this. It sounds like you have a lot of qualifications. I want to acknowledge that our starting rate for this position is, and the example I've got on the slide, it's $41,000 a year. And that's a full-time position with benefits requiring some evenings and weekends, a schedule that rotates a little bit over 3 weeks, that sort of thing. And before we go so far as to bring you in for an interview and have you commit, your time and effort to us and us to you, I'm wondering, I want to be sure you're comfortable with that annual salary and those working conditions. Now, more often than not, if somebody is comfortable, they're going to say that. They're going to say, yes, I'd be comfortable with that. That should be in your job posting too, by the way, that rate of pay. A lot of folks will not include the starting salary. And near as I can tell, and I talk to people about that, I think the reason why is they want to encourage as many applicants as they can. and they don't want to see people kind of, look at the wage and say, well, I'm making that now, so I'm not going to bother. I think it's a terrible waste of your time and others if you don't include that information, because as much as a job is about a lot of things, it's also about compensation. We're kidding ourselves if we don't think that's the case. And so it's important to include that salary in there. If you have the ability to hire based on experience, then you would list and state to the individual that the salary range is $41,000 to $50,000. Are you comfortable with that range? Now, you got to be ready that they're probably thinking higher than 41 in that case. But if you've got a budget that has you limited to 41,000 or whatever number it is, state that. Be sure to say it, because if you say that number and you ask them, before I offer you an interview, I want to be sure you're comfortable with that annual salary and those working conditions. If the answer is no, then thank them for their time and let them know if something should change, we may be in touch. But if they say yes, then you can still say, okay, very good. We'll be in touch one way or another here in the next week or so. And then you've got a list of folks. You do this for 4 or 5 different job candidates, your top maybe 5 or even 10 candidates if you want to go that deep. You make a list of all the folks that not only have the qualifications you're looking for, but who are also willing to work for the rate of pay you're offering, then half your battle come job offer time is already achieved. Very often we get to the point of offering a job and somebody says, oh gosh, no, not for 41,000. No, I'm making 44 or 5 right now. So, I would be willing to move jobs for 48. And then you engage in this decision about whether or not we can find more money in our budget or whether we want to do something different. And it usually leaves people with a bad taste in their mouth, both the employer and the job candidate. So that's my suggestion about that. Any questions about that?
I'm not seeing any right now.
Hearing none, we're going to move right along. So if there are, just go ahead and send them off to Jamie. So types of interview questions. You got to consider that if you can create a conversation-like atmosphere, it's going to be best for your interview. If you just engage in this question-answer exchange between the interviewer and the interviewee, then generally speaking, you're not going to learn as much, and you're not going to have a good sense of the person. And research on interviewing shows that those conversation-like atmospheres for interviews result in the greatest sense of knowledge about an individual and whether or not they'd be a good fit. So I've got an example here. So one example might be, a traditional question would be, are you good at engaging both parents and kids during story time? Of course, they're going to say, oh yeah, I'm great at it, and they might offer a little more. But what if instead of that, you ask this question? Tell us about how you would run a story time. And then you're just sitting back listening to them, and you're prepared to ask additional questions based on the kinds of things they might say or the kinds of information they might offer. If you ask that question, tell us about how you would run a story time, you're going to get different answers from different candidates, right? And you're going to see that some are more prepared and more experienced at it. Some might even tell you, well, back in the early days, I did it this way, but I found that ever since cell phones came into the library and kids are distracted and parents are distracted, I need to be more engaged with parents. Here's an example, that follow-up question I had here. How would you engage a rambunctious toddler whose parents seem distracted by their phone? This is something that takes practice. There's no other way around it. And for those of you who might have attended the workshop I did there in Wisconsin, you'll recall that I'm a big fan of encouraging people to role play these discussions or exchanges with a trusted colleague. So if you're preparing for an interview, rather than just crafting the questions, just imagine the value and how much more prepared you'll be if you sit with a trusted colleague and kind of walk through some of those questions with them. Kind of like you're the interviewer and they're the interviewee. Just imagine how that can add to your success in the interview. It can help you prepare to have a more conversation-like atmosphere. And so that's another tip of mine that I would suggest you consider. We got more sample questions. So here's one. Please share your process for engaging your coworkers when planning programs. They might go ahead and offer up their question. Now, something I do in a lot of interviews, and candidates are never expecting this, but I usually get really good information out of them when I do this, is after I ask that question and they start to give their answer, and this is not, by the way, this is not at the very beginning of the interview because people are still warming up to each other. This is like midway through. So midway to the second half of the interview, I got a question I might ask. Please share your process for engaging your coworkers when planning programs. And they're going to give an answer to that, okay? But then, right near the end of their answer, I'm going to say, okay, let's just role play this for a second. You know, I'm your coworker, and I feel like we need to bring back programs on the petting zoo, but the library director has expressed that we take a break on that program ever since the incident, you know, whatever the incident was, you can imagine. It's a petting zoo, it could have been anything. So let's just role play. And the person will almost always, you know, nod their head and say, okay, and you're giving nonverbal cues, you're smiling. Could you just role play this with me for a second? And they're smiling back, okay, great, let's do it. They say, why can't we have the petting zoo? And they're going to offer you an explanation. And then in this example, I said, well, you know, here's a list of parents that have asked me about the petting zoo, and I feel like it would just be awful if we disappointed them. You know, can't you go back to the director and find a way to bring the petting zoo back? We think it would be really great. You know, in this way and in this manner, we get to see how this individual is going to interact with their colleagues. And yeah, they know they're in an interview, but it's also very easy for them to just kind of slip into themselves in this moment. And generally speaking, we see the best in people in these moments. And sometimes we don't see things that really get us too excited or make us feel too good about it. But overall, in these moments when we role play, we very often see the best in people. I've had people express to me, you know, that they're really great at doing reader's advisory. And then I've said, okay, well, how about we do a little reader's advisory role play right now? And they say, sure. And then I say, hey, I'm looking for a book. And then without asking that critical question of what have you read recently, or what do you enjoy reading, or what have you enjoyed recently, they just suddenly refer me to a book. You know, and so right then and there, I know, well, they don't really have a good grasp of you know, some of our techniques for doing reader's advisory. So we talked about planning your interview, making sure that you you have copies of the questions in writing. The reason that you want to do this is because you want to make sure that you're asking the same questions of all candidates. Now, of course, that's next to impossible if you're going to create an atmosphere of conversation like interview. But if you have the structure in place, then you'll be all set. It's important to manage your time, kind of like I'm trying to do right now. I notice the clock is getting a little long here, and so I want to keep moving along through things. I'm going to say to candidates at times, I want to remind you that we have 20 questions to get through and just 30 minutes left. So we need to make sure that we get through these. Consider having a greeting party. This is somebody who, when someone arrives, they give a brief tour, they talk a little bit about the position, they kind of warm them up. Think about it that way. You know, I mean, they're about to come in, and they're coming in cold, and very often, as we do in libraries, there's a team of people interviewing the candidates. That can be really intimidating. Now, if somebody's had a tour and they feel like they've been greeted warmly and whatnot, that can be really helpful. Now, conversely, a lot of our candidates are internal candidates. How weird is it for them to come to the home office, sit outside the door, waiting for that interview, having their colleagues or whatever see them all dressed up in that business-like suit that they might wear, and you know, everybody knows they're a candidate for the interview. Well, we can only provide so much anonymity, but do be mindful of that. It's important not to parade your internal candidates through a building or to make them feel uncomfortable in any way. On that same note, if somebody is planning an interview, an internal candidate is planning to come in and interview at, say, 11 o'clock today, let's not have them work from 9 to 11. I mean, working from 9 to 11 isn't fair to them. The whole time they're thinking about the interview, they're not really able to prepare like they would if they took the day off. My recommendation is to invite them to take some leave time or flex their time so that they can have that time off that morning and work additional hours later. That way you're going to see them at their best. And then it's important to provide closure. You always want to acknowledge and appreciate people for the time and effort that they put in to putting forth their, putting their best foot forward on this job. You want to commit to them to making a decision quickly. And I've got a note here that we're going to make a decision in the next 5 days, and we'll be in touch either way by phone or email. Very often, employers have gotten out of the habit of contacting employees. And one of the things the Society of Human Resource Managers has talked about recently is this notion that a lot of people are applying for jobs but not showing up for interviews or not responding when employers call them to talk about their application. And I think this is a direct result of years and years of employers really neglecting their job applicants. I'm not suggesting you write a personal handwritten note to all your job applicants. Well, that'd be nice, but I think it's really important for people to have closure and to always, be professional and be prompt with that. So evaluations. It's important to have a simple evaluation tool. This is so easy to develop. You take all those different questions that you're going to ask in the interview and you list them out, and you give everybody a copy of those and make sure there's space between each question so that somebody can write 2 or 3 sentences or statements if they want, different phrases that'll help them remember the candidate's response. And if you want to get fancy with it, then put like a numerical rating on it too. And it could be a number 1 through 7 or 1 through 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. It doesn't mean that how people score the candidate is going to result in the decision. What it means is that it's going to help give them retrieval cues about how they felt about that candidate. So later when they're talking about the candidates, they're able to refer to their notes. Those notes, you're going to want to hang on to those for a year because it's required for you to hang on to those notes for a year by law before you shred them. Now, there's another piece I want to mention here. It's the second bullet about managing the interview team debriefing. I like to begin the interview day with a meeting with the team, and I like to end with this same statement. I like to remind people, we're here to support, in this case, Barbara, our hiring supervisor, in making her decision. What that means is that we're not here to necessarily reach consensus. We might disagree about different candidates as being the best candidate, but it's important for Barbara to hear our discussion and our thoughts about each candidate so that she can make the best decision. And the reason that's so important is because Barbara's the one who's going to be supervising this person. And I've seen it happen where hiring supervisors have acquiesced to, maybe 1 or 2 other individuals at the table who strongly recommended they hire somebody that they really believed in. The problem with that is when things go south with that candidate, the hiring supervisor is not vested in resolving or addressing the information or addressing the issue with the individual. So I've gone to the next and last slide, which talks about bonus information. And I'll pause for a minute, Jamie, if you want me to talk about this stuff, I can. Otherwise, I can address any questions that are out there.
I'm not seeing any questions, so please go ahead and talk about these things.
Okay, you asked the question. Raise your hand if your library has had a petting zoo incident. Well, my hand's raised right now, so I'll just leave it at that. So bonus information, circulation assistance subpool, I talked about this before. You have the document there, and it talks about the fact that this is a temporary to basically attempt to normal kind of staffing arrangement. So the beautiful thing about the subpool, in a nutshell, is that it allows you to watch and observe how somebody works. And you can make a decision as to whether or not they're really going to fit in as a regular employee. Because they're a sub, i.e. a casual employee, they're not a regular employee. And so they're able to pick up additional hours. They're able to fill in when maybe you've got a vacancy. They're able to fill in when somebody needs to be off for a medical leave or on vacation, whatever the case may be. And that's a nice thing about it. But the really neat thing about it is it saves a ton of time in hiring, because what happens is, what we experienced here is it used to be a staff to fill timeline of about 56 days from the time somebody would announce that they need to leave to the time that we had the position filled. And in that time, we'd have to convene a hiring committee, and we'd have to organize orientation and training for that individual. And then we might get through it only to learn that a month or two into the job, the person said, oh, this is too hard, this isn't for me, or whatever. And then we'd start the process all over again. Now we hire in a group of people as subs, and we get them trained up as subs, and then when an opening happens, we simply place them at one of our locations. And it's a beautiful thing. The process goes really, really quickly. So that's that. You can read all about that. I've got the instructions written out about how that works, because I've gotten a lot of questions about it over the years. And like I shared, it's something that's used at probably 8 or 10 different libraries around Michigan now. And it's so simple, it's genius. It's not really genius, it's just really simple, but we put it all together and now people are using it. So we're pretty proud of that. The next thing is, and I got just another minute or two, Jamie?
Yeah.
Okay. The next thing is I would direct you at some point to check out bookmarkhr.com. When I was in Wisconsin, I shared with the group that I presented to that we were developing something that would allow libraries to ascertain whether or not somebody would be a good fit for customer service work in a public library. And we collaborated with probably close to 500 library staff around the United States and Canada, and basically pulled together all kinds of information that a third party out of Indiana called Performance Assessment Network developed for us. They developed a specific library industry specific assessment tool that takes about 20 minutes for a person to complete. And we are now using that to help screen our job applicants. So when we post a job and we have maybe 80 to 100 people apply for it, we narrow it down to maybe our top 7 or 8, and then we have those top 7 or 8 people take the bookmark tool. We call it the bookmark, by the way, because we feel like a bookmark gets you right to what you need to be looking for and keeps you from wasting your time. So we have them take the bookmark assessment. We instantly get the results. The bookmark assessment tells us a green light, yellow light, or red light for each candidate, and it measures 12 different constructs, and it gives us feedback on all those different constructs for that individual. And it's been scientifically validated, and it's a beautiful tool. That's what we're using, and we worked with the provider that helped us develop it out of Indiana. They are now hosting it so that other libraries can use it. And it does not say Kent District Library on it, you'll be glad to know. If you decided to use this tool, you would send the provider your logo and your name, and they could upload all that information so that when your candidates receive this tool in the mail, then it's going to look like it came directly from you. So if you're from, say, Appleton, Wisconsin, and they're going to open up their email that says you've been asked to complete this assessment, it's going to say from Appleton, Wisconsin. It's pretty slick. We've got, in the last 2 months, we've had about, a little over 30 libraries around the United States and Canada start using it. So it just rolled out a couple months ago. I'd really encourage you to take a look at it. Give me your feedback if you've got any. bookmarkhr.com.
That is awesome. We are just about out of time. Before we close today, I do want to mention one comment that came in the chat box about the petting zoo, and that is Donovan said, the only petting zoo incident I've had at the library was a miscommunication when I held a tech petting zoo and a preschool was brought in expecting goats and bunnies, and I had tablets and e-readers.
I love it.
So we have Brian's email is on the screen. I'm sure he would be happy to take any follow-up questions from any of you. Thank you, Brian, for an awesome presentation. We have a little break coming up. Our next presentation in the library leadership track is at 1 o'clock Central Standard Time on Great Expectations, Customer Service, and the Future of Libraries. So I hope to see some of you at that session. If not, I hope you have a great rest of your day. So long.
Thank you.